Good morning, Matt. Thanks for hopping on this morning. I know earlier this week you hosted a conversation with David Bridges and Bruce Hirsch, both partners at Capital Counsel, and you talked about how tariff changes could impact rental businesses moving forward. For our members that weren't able to attend the webinar, could you just give us a recap of that conversation?
Yeah, sure, Lauren. Thanks for having me. Uh, Bruce and David did a great job on the webinar. They touched on a number of issues in looking at the what I like to call the political chessboard out there in regards to tariffs, especially their impact on equipment and event rental. And I think the big takeaway was there's going to be a lot of uncertainty going forward, which is not the message we want everyone to have. Because I know everyone in their businesses in the rental industry wants certainty, but unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. And in fact, we saw it during the webinar when President Trump actually signed an agreement with Great Britain during the webinar. And so basically, let me just summarize real quick, if you're okay with that, what Bruce had said. So basically, if you're looking at the tariffs out there, every country has a 10% tariff on it right now. And then there's some countries that have special tariffs on them, or special treatment, I should say, that Bruce was alluding to. Canada, 25%, Mexico, 25%, China, which is the big one, 145%. And then you have other different types of tariffs for aluminum and steel, which is important to our event rental folks because they have a lot of aluminum frames and steel floors for their tenting. And then potash and automobiles really probably aren't of concern, but they have special tariff rates. And then that's kind of the lay of the land on tariffs. And then once you go beyond that, it gets even more complicated because you have this thing called this trade agreement called the United States, Mexico, and Canada trade agreement that excluded a bunch of goods. And if goods are covered in that agreement, they're excluded from the tariffs, which is good news. But that agreement is like we could have a 5-hour conversation on that, and that's not going to work for anyone's time. But just bear that in mind that this is a very complicated issue with a lot of moving parts. Then the president said that he is going to have retaliatory tariffs, which are very high tariffs that depends on I think it's the GDP divided by something else, but they're basically like 36% all the way up to 57% for some countries. And there's 57 countries, and actually I should say 56 because what I just said earlier, Britain had signed that. And those are paused till April. The whole idea is to bring those countries in to negotiate a deal. However, that's going to create some uncertainty for the market as well because those will all be getting developed. And then last on that front, you have these other things going on to U.S. Office of Trade representative where you have these 301 actions where they're going after shipping from China. They're going to possibly if they're successful, add 1.5 million to every vessel coming in from China that's under a Chinese flag. And that has not gone through yet, but that's in the works. And there's a couple other things going on. So at the end of the day, Bruce and David said, that keep an eye on the supply chain. Let ARA, let me know if you're having issues, but watch your supply chain, especially from China, and then for the equipment folks for parts, because we think with the big equipment you could probably defer your purchases if that's an issue till everything settles down. And then for the equipment or the event people, it's going to be a little bit more problematic because they source a lot of their materials from not only China but from Asia, and they're going to, this is going to be a problem for them a little bit going forward until some of these trade agreements get ironed out. And I'm sorry, Lauren, you had a very great, concise question, and I've given you a 20-minute answer, and I didn't mean to.
This was great. I do have some follow-up questions. There were a couple of things in there. You talked about that certain goods were excluded from tariffs from Canada and Mexico. Do you know any of the specifics there of what goods are excluded?
I didn't want to get into that just because you have the trade agreement, which is a huge trade agreement that was signed actually in the Trump's first administration. But if anything is covered in that, that's an exclusion from the tariffs. So for instance, one thing we were looking into is I think they were excluded partially cars, and we were thinking, would that apply to off-road commercial machinery that a lot of our equipment guys use and our event people use for raising the tents, and we couldn't get that. I think they didn't get excluded from that. At least was our reading. But as always, they should be contacting their attorney to get the specifics on it. We can't give out free legal advice here,
Yes.
but that is a potential out for them if they can make that connection to the USMCA.
Great. And then my other follow-up question was, you had talked about some of the tariffs that were going to be paused through April, and it's now May 9th. Are they still paused? What's the status of that
Yeah,
grouping?
yes, and I'm sorry if I messed that up there. It was the retaliatory tariffs, and they were put in place in April. The stock market took a dive. They immediately, within 2 days, paused those till July. It's a 90-day pause from April till July. And then my guess, actually, I should say my guess, Bruce said during the webinar, he thought that they would be paused again if they didn't have an agreement worked out. And we had talked about this. It's amazing that they got the agreement with Great Britain. Supposedly they're supposed to talk to China this weekend, and they've got India and a couple others in the queue lined up. But it's usually takes an administration, Lauren, probably like a year or 2 years to negotiate one trade agreement with one country, and they're trying to do all this. But
Sure.
clearly they've got them queued up.
So would you say, because we have these queued up conversations, we know they're going to be happening, it would point to hopefully whether or not the end result is what we want to see, that, decisions could be made from these conversations and
Yes, no,
meetings that are happening.
yeah, and I think what you're hitting on is what I always like refer to as regulatory certainty, because businesses can take good or bad news. What they can't have trouble with is the rug getting pulled out from under them the
Mhm.
next day. And I think once these negotiations are settled, I think they'll get some more certainty to that. But that Bruce did not have a clear outlook on that, and how could he? Because like there's basically one person making decisions in the White House on this, but we're thinking this could take another year or two to get those all in place potentially. But we hope that's not the case. And Great
Absolutely.
Britain's a good omen and good sign. They got that done quickly.
I would agree. So what can we tell our members? How are you staying on top of the conversation? What advice can we give them to stay on top of what's going on in Washington, D.C.?
Sure. So what I would say is, let me know if you're seeing any problems, because if we don't know, I mean, you guys are the front lines, and if you're not sharing info with us, and the info we'd love for you to share is, hey, I'm having orders canceled, or hey, the prices are being, increased on me on this, or I'm seeing problems in the supply chain here or there. That would help us greatly. I'm staying on top of it in DC, but to be frank, there's besides monitoring it and sending some letters in, there's not a lot we can do, because this is like the system administration is just ingrained in the sand, and they're not going to move on this. But be aware of it and watch your supply lines, I guess, is our biggest ask.
Then I would say to members that as soon as we know information, we always do our best to share it with you as soon as possible by hosting these lunch and learns. Make sure you're subscribed to Rental Pulse, because we will continue to put articles and information that Matt and our government affairs team has shared in our news outlets and shared on our social media. So one other thing I wanted to mention was, in addition to Matt's conversation with Capitol Council this week, we hosted the Rentalytics webinars for the United States, Canada, and the event segment. So if you're interested in a more in-depth conversation about tariffs, economic forecasting, and more, please reach out to me via email, and we will make sure that we get that information shared with you too. So thanks so much, Matt, for the recap and update this morning.
Thanks, Lauren. Really appreciate all your help. Thank you.